What if I told you that the cultural chaos that we're seeing right now in 2026 is not a series of accidents, but the implementation of a blueprint over 200 years old? From the secret mission of the Italian Carbonari to destroy Christianity, to the reason that the Illuminati is on the $1 bill, we are pulling back the curtain on the satanic conspiracy designed to exchange your religious liberty for government enslavement. Rebecca Terrell from the New American Magazine is here to explain why the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, how the education system was standardized to stop you from thinking critically, and the one oath that was removed from the Catholic Church to let the modern world in. Now, if you want to know how to stop playing political whack a mole and start winning, you do not want to miss this. All right, we have with us a very special guest. I am really excited for this conversation. Rebecca Terrell from the New American. She's the senior editor, one of the senior editors of the New American Magazine. I love seeing you on a lot of the videos that they do, and I'm so just really grateful for all the things that the New American publishes. Appreciate you for your efforts there. And several months ago, I did a video with Dr. Joe Wolverton, and we talked about how it's very important within the within the liberty movement that we're not afraid to talk about religion,
right?
And how it affects us. And there is too often that we try to be this ecumenical, where I'm not going to mention my beliefs, you don't mention your beliefs, and I'm like, no, I think that that's very important. It guides us, and it's the reason behind what we do, even though we have different religious backgrounds and faiths and specific beliefs. We still work together for liberty, and that's a great thing. It's an important thing. We can do that, but you shouldn't, leave your religion at the door, and I shouldn't have to leave my religion at the door. We should both bring it in, and it should guide us in everything that we do, I believe, and we shouldn't check that. And so, I wanted to have somebody on with a different religious belief than myself, but we're united in the cause of liberty.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that we're going to talk about today, I think, is very interesting with the things that I've also talked about regarding Mormonism and the things that are issues there. And there's a quote that I think is very important because I think for a long time, Catholicism and the Catholic Church has been a famous, whipping boy, right?
Yeah.
And there's a quote that's important because even though I'm not a Catholic, we need to recognize the conspiracy's attack upon the Catholic Church,
Sure.
and that's an undeniable fact. And so I want to get into that. So there's an organization called the Carbonari, and basically they're the Italian branch of the Illuminati.
Yes.
And in their mission statement, which was written in 1818, it says, quote, "Our final aim is that of Voltaire and the French Revolution, the destruction forever of Catholicism and even of the Christian idea, which if left standing on the ruins of Rome, would be the resuscitation of Christianity later on." So their final aim is that of Voltaire and the French Revolution. The French Revolution, if people aren't aware, was led by the Jacobins, which is the French chapter of the Illuminati. And so they're saying, as another chapter of the Illuminati, that their goal is the same. They want to destroy Christianity with Catholicism as its kind of main focus, because they believe that if Rome was left standing, that Christianity would be able to continue on. And that which is very interesting, because then it's going to get into another point that I wanted to bring up, or have us bring up later on, is the concept that's been said before. I can't remember who said it. Maybe you'll be able to remind me. But it was said that Catholics don't, or was it pastors or bishops don't become communists? Communists become pastors. And so that's really your background. Why I had you on, Rebecca, was you're what's referred to as a traditional Catholic, and that was maybe different than maybe your average person that doesn't know the distinction between the Pope that we see, that is presented as the Catholic Church, and what a
traditional Catholic would be. I've known many traditional Catholics: Jonathan McManus, president of the John Birch Society, the current president of the John Birch Society, William F. Jasper. I'm trying to think. Oh, Mel Gibson's dad wrote a book, "Is the Pope Catholic?" about how how the Pope isn't actually Catholic, and goes into that. And so I wanted to ask you some questions. I want to talk to you. Have you maybe give us some history about the infiltration of the Catholic Church, and how we see that today? And is the Catholic Church that is seen as the Catholic Church today, is it actually what a traditional Catholic would consider to be the Catholic Church? And so I appreciate, with that background, I appreciate having on, and like to talk to you about those things. Kind of maybe give us an introduction.
Absolutely. Well, you're very kind. Thank you for that introduction earlier, and I do appreciate it. Yeah, wow, you just unpacked about probably 5 or 6 shows that we could do. All the different, topics that you just addressed. Yeah, my background is such that I have been a Latin Mass Catholic. I go to the Latin Mass, since I was 16 years old, so we won't talk about how long ago that was, but I did not have gray hair at that time. So, too, I wanted to point out, so you've got different we joke. I have a friend who jokes and says that the traditional Catholic world is a loose confederation of warring tribes, because you just named with all the people that you just named several different little factions within traditional Catholicism.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
for instance, Mel Gibson's father is the Pope Catholic. That's known as sedevacantism, and they believe that the sede, the seat, vacantism, is vacant. The seat is vacant. The seat of Saint Peter, the chair in Rome, the
But there's
Pope.
no real Pope, really.
Right, and see, and I don't believe that. I do believe that there's been a lot of bad stuff coming out, but we read in the Bible that Saint Paul tells us that he withstood Saint Peter, the first pope, to his face, because he was to be condemned for something that there was a he was trying to get people to he was trying to say that people had to be circumcised to become Catholic, right? And
Right.
that was the big fight back then. Was St. Paul was going, no, no, this isn't, you have to go through the Jewish rites before you become Christian. And so we do know that we have that biblical precedent from St. Paul himself, who was raised up to the third heaven, and told words that can't be said on earth.
That's a
That
really important point, because so many people from many, with religions with a head, that
Yes,
say that you're not allowed to criticize the head.
right. And well, St. Paul did. So what is he? Where is he right now? You know
Yeah,
what I mean? So we have to realize that yes, we are all human, and God is the one who is the true head, and the Pope is the reason he's called the vicar of Christ on earth, is because he is the visible head of the church on earth, and the spokesman for, and supposed to be the protector of all that Christ taught us, and not to invent new novelties and try to lead the church down this crazy path that you see it going now. And I do not blame people for criticizing the modern Catholic Church, what they see coming out of it, because on one hand, you'll hear the Pope one day talking about how abortion is evil and wrong, and we must do everything we can to stop abortion, which we can all agree on. And then the next day he's having lunch with transvestites and all of the and oh, who am I to judge? We that famous line, "Who am I to judge?" from Pope Francis, who was predecessor of the current Pope Leo the 14th. And so
which is insane, because we commanded to judge.
I'm like, you're the Pope. That's who you are. Yeah, you know,
Kind of your job.
that's your job. Exactly. So, in answer to your question, you're the Pope. That's who you are. So, and he has to lead. Christ founded the church to teach, govern, and sanctify all men. Think about that. That's something that a cradle Catholic is going to know. Oh, yes, why did Christ found the church? Famous question from the catechism that we all learned when we were little in Catholic school. Why did Christ found the church? To teach, govern, and sanctify all men. And you just kind of da 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 da. Oh, that's the answer. I got it right. Check it off. Well, to
Mhm.
teach, to govern as government. The
Right.
social kingship of Christ is a very important dogma. that, Catholics just kind of, all right, maybe I shouldn't say dogma, but it's a very important teaching of the church that we just kind of, because we believe this leftist tripe that you hit on in your intro, we have believed this, oh, you can't impose your ideas on other people. That's true only to a point. Tolerance is not a virtue. Tolerance is actually an evil. It's only okay when you exercise it in order to prevent a greater evil or promote a greater good, you
Mhm.
know? So when you tolerate something, like say your kid, your teenager,
Yeah.
you tolerate a lot from your teenagers, don't you?
Yep.
But it is always either to avoid a greater evil or promote a greater good. So
Uh-huh.
now when I put it back down in the family context, you understand it because I've made it real to you, right?
Right.
And
Right.
then why do we get outside that family? Now let's go to just your neighborhood. There might be a neighbor who's kind of a troublemaker or something like that.
Yeah.
But you pick your battles,
Right.
that saying, that's your meaning. I'm tolerating this evil to avoid a greater evil or promote a greater good.
Yeah.
So, and so that works on the family level. It works on the neighborhood level. Why do we think when we get out farther than that, we change we change our modus operandi? Why
Right.
is that? No, that actually is the way we should treat all of society, um, because we are watching the destruction of our culture right now. We're supposed to accept when anybody comes in with any other ideas that Jesus said, if you deny my father, if you deny me before men, I will deny you before my father,
Mhm.
right? Jesus
Yep.
said that. So yes, and I'm not saying, oh, take up arms and go shoot everybody who isn't, who's if they're Muslim or if they're
Right.
Buddhist or all these other religions.
Or just not Catholic.
Right, right, exactly. No, you don't take up arms and all of a sudden mow
Right.
people down.
Right.
But you also have to say, okay, the greater good is preservation of our culture, of our
Yeah.
society.
Right.
And if you're starting to infringe on that, that's where I'm not gonna tolerate you anymore,
Right.
you know? That's not gonna happen, and that's why back in the day, all of our state constitutions established the states as Christian states. They weren't scared about it, you know? That's what it was so unusual. A couple of years back, the state Supreme Court of Alabama ruled about in vitro fertilization and the discarding of those fertilized eggs
Yeah.
in vitro fertilization centers, and they said, "No, no, 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 you can't do that because people are created in the image and likeness of God." And the um, chief justice of that Supreme Court actually invoked God and invoked, teachings of Saint Thomas, scholasticism from Saint Thomas, and invoked things from our recent history as well as long past. It's so unusual to hear that these days. It shouldn't be unusual.
Right.
And that shows you how far the decay has gone. We're not so far, though. I believe we're not so far that we can't gain it back. But we need to understand, stop listening and repeating the narratives of the left. I
Mhm.
have something that I've written about a lot in the New American Magazine. I say you can always see the trajectory of a country or anywhere, a state, a locality, by how the women are behaving.
Mhm.
And however the women how are they acting? What is their language like? How are they dressing? How are they treating the family? Are they treating the family like one little compartment of their lives, or are they fulfilling their mandate, their godly mandate to be mothers? The sacrament of matrimony, the word matrimony means it means the sacrament that makes a woman into a mother. Think about the root word of matrimony.
Yeah.
That that's matri, that's mother. The sacrament that makes a woman into a mother. And so if somehow that feminist movement, which by the way was funded by all of the same people who were implementing the Federal Reserve System and the income tax in our country. It's about the same time, 1913. That's when all that was happening. And then the suffragettes and all of the leaders of that movement were the wives of the men who had destroyed our economic system.
Mhm.
And so if you look at that, there was a great report done. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't remember who wrote it and where you can find it online. I can certainly send it to you so you could let your listeners know how to find it. But there's a wonderful report on this done several years ago. And they found that the suffragette movement had more money than all of the major political parties in the
Wow.
country at that time combined. They had
Wow.
more money. So, and it's always you see this guiding hand through the centuries, and of course, definitely through the most recent decades. So that there's a demonic influence guiding this, right?
Right.
The devil never changes his spots like a leopard. He knew he had in the Garden of Eden, he had to get Adam, right? But it
Mhm.
wasn't a frontal assault. He went through the woman. And
Mhm.
the devil is always going to go through the women of the society to tear down that society. There was an Oxford scholar, his name was J.D. Unwin, who wrote a book in the 1930s called Sex and Culture. Now, it wasn't anything gross like that Havelock Ellis and all that sexologist stuff. It wasn't bad. He was actually identifying what drives the decay of a society. He investigated 80 or 90 cultures across 5,000 years and found that every single time you had a culture that had sexual freedom, his words, sexual freedom, that culture was absolutely was destined for demolition.
Yeah.
It never survived. That culture never survived. And it was short-lived. It was within 3 generations, it was gone. They were demolished. And you see it too when you read the Bible. You see all of history has been this
Yeah.
continual cyclical pattern of people fall into licentiousness and debauchery. God allows their enemies to conquer them. They're enslaved. We have, Egypt, we have the Babylonian captivity, all of that. And then they do penance and they acknowledge their sins, they humble themselves before God, and like God says in the Bible, I will heal their land. That's the recipe, and that's what we need to do now. So I say, get women need to get back in the home, barefoot and pregnant, have lots of babies. Let's
Yeah.
repeople our society and let's build our culture. And that's the only way it's gonna happen.
You're such a misogynist. I can't believe you would say that.
I know. Isn't that terrible? Isn't that just terrible? But you know what? I think that the millennials and Zoomers, even though wow, they have a lot of problems,
Sure.
the men in the millennial and Zoomer generations are starting to come around. The women aren't. The women are largely they've caved to all of the lies about all of the perversions of the left. And but the men are starting to see, and the men are looking for women who talk like I have been, except the ones
Yeah.
that don't have gray hair. So we're starting to see that. So I see a resurgence. It's small as of yet, but it's coming, and I've written about that too in
Yeah.
the New Americans. So
That's that's an important thing for people to understand as well, because even if you're not Catholic, you need to understand how the conspiracy is undermining the culture and the society, and
yep.
that they understand natural law as much as God does. And that's why they're doing these things, because they know it will lead to the collapse. They know it will lead to our enslavement, and that's why they're doing it.
Mhm.
Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely, and it has been a concerted effort. You mentioned the Carbonari in your
mhm.
intro, and so we have to look back through all of history to be able to tell what's coming next. Because again, history just repeats. We never learn from our mistakes. When I say we, I mean mankind as a whole.
Sure.
We keep making the same mistakes because there's that guiding hand trying to lead us astray, but of course, he's no match for God. So in the end, God's going to win. But we've just got to, if you do look at history, so if you look, let's just start. I'm going to start since you invoked the Illuminati. It did not
Yeah.
begin with the Illuminati naturally. It actually began, I would say, Petrarch back in was it the 14th century that he lived? he was the first one who started in with this idea of, oh, we can reach all truths just through rational thinking, just by observing the world around us. He's
Is that the
considered the
beginning of the
father.
Enlightenment?
Right. He was kind of the father of that, even though that's not when the Enlightenment, he was the first spark of it.
Right.
He exerted a lot of influence, and I'm sure through, through demonic help. But he was the one who first invoked the idea of the dark ages. Oh, all of these ages before me, the darkness and gloom of my own age is what he said. And people took that and named it the dark ages. Well, no, it wasn't the dark ages. So many advancements.
I wish we had the architecture of the dark ages.
Right. They were wonderful. I mean, society was blooming. And I'll tell you why. And this is, people aren't going to like this, and people don't like when I say this. Okay.
Yeah.
But look at the structure of the government back then in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You had monarchies,
Yeah.
Catholic monarchies.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that just because they were Catholic, they were without stain. There were Catholic monarchs, but you had the church. The church was the one who crowned them. The coronation ceremony is a Catholic ritual, is a ritual of the church. And the Pope got to tell them what to do. So the Pope would say, no, you're not going to exploit my sheep. You're not going to exploit all the people, because the government is going to exploit people. That's what governments always end up doing.
Right.
Governments devolve. But you have this overarching, that the person who the government has to answer to, and I'll give you an example. This is just a real practical example. There's something in the Catholic Church called Holy Days of Obligation. And they're days that are set apart that aren't Sundays, but they're treated like Sundays. Businesses are supposed to close down. You're not supposed to do servile work. You're supposed to go to church. It's a vacation day. Okay. Mm-hmm. Back in that time, the church had almost 100 of those throughout the year. Now think about how many days are there in the year? 365. You have 100 of those, and you got almost a quarter of the year that is mandatory vacation. That was kind of nice. You know what I mean? The church kind of looked out for the little guy at the expense of the government. It wasn't like, oh, government teams up with the church and they exploit the little guy. It was very much different. It was very much the opposite of that, where the church is kind of standing there as a bulwark. So the government can't do what governments naturally do, devolve to authoritarianism. So you have a patriarch who comes in, and he's the first one. There was Francis Bacon too, the father, who all this rational, and you see that, oh, we can arrive at truths through rational thought, and then
Bacon was probably an early version of the Illuminati. Like, I don't know what other organization would have been, but absolutely.
Right, exactly. And so it goes on, and then you have it fully flowered in the Enlightenment period, when they just come out, they're full-fledged, unabashed atheists. Atheism spread like wildfire. And so they're talking about, oh, we can arrive at truths. We don't need God. I think, therefore I am, that kind of thing. And so, but yes, it was Adam Weishaupt who, in the Bavarian Illuminati, he exploited the Freemasonic lodges, which were already set up throughout Europe, and kind of infiltrated those and used those as a network. He was smart. He didn't try to start, from the ground up. He just exploited the network that was already there. Yeah. So, and that's what came out of. They always have a lot of different names, but it's all the same people. Okay, so they have Illuminati, and you mentioned Jacobin, and Freemason, and there are all these different names, all these different heads on the Hydra, but it's all the same Hydra.
Exact beast, yep.
And then another name you mentioned, Carbonari. So when Adam Weishaupt died, the man who took over as head of the Illuminati was Giuseppe Mazzini, the head of the Carbonari. So right there you see, wait, which one does he head? Oh, it's the same thing. Okay. Right, exactly. Except it was very militant. So it was very militant in France. And I don't know if you've ever read the book Robespierre by Otto Scott. He was a historian. He's deceased now. The best book on the French Revolution that I've ever read. It's hard to find. But he actually took the accounts from the day and reported on actually what happened, not on what historians have said since then, but actually took accounts from the day and made that. Just an incredible book. It's a horrifying book. It's out. You think this happened in Europe? This is insane. It's like hell. I don't know have you ever read The Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens?
I haven't.
I know that that's a work of fiction, but that's another good one to get a real feel of what went on, and
Oh,
it might be a work of fiction, but it's very much historical fiction with emphasis on the history. So either one of those, if you can't find Robespierre
yeah,
by Otto Scott, definitely you can certainly find A Tale of Two Cities. It's worth reading, and it's worth thinking too how many parallels between what was going on in that book and Tale of Two Cities in that story and what's going on right now. It's kind of like when
mhm,
you read Brave New World or 1984, you're like, whoa, actually, it's in a lot of ways even worse now, but those
right,
books kind of were prophetic. But anyway, the Carbonari was very militant too in Italy, and you have to understand it from that perspective of so they're focused on the Catholic Church. Most of Europe was Catholic,
mhm,
If you were
right,
Christian, you're Catholic, it was the same thing,
right.
So that's why they're
There
focused
was
on
nothing but Catholics until what? Until was it King Henry wanted to
right,
get a divorce, right?
15,
Basically,
yeah,
yeah.
1500s. Well, but
So,
think about
so
this
for
too.
1,500
Okay,
years, there was one church.
but think about this too. Okay, so and you're right. Okay, he used the divorce as the excuse to break from the church.
Right,
And then what did he do? What was his real goal? Because okay, he divorced that woman and he married the other one, and a few years later he chopped off her head, right?
right,
So did he really do that for love? Or did
right.
he do it because the moment he declared himself sovereign over the church, he took all of the church properties, took all of the church money. He had been near bankruptcy before, and now he's swimming in it. So, what
Yep,
was his real goal? It was an
yep,
excuse. It was an excuse. The divorce thing was an excuse. And we've got to
absolutely.
think about things that way. We've got to think, okay, these, I read recently that um, Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey
Hmm.
Epstein's girlfriend.
Yeah,
It was her father who owned all the textbook that owned that Maxwell, the textbook company.
yeah,
He's the one his textbook company has taught generations of school children in the United States now, right? And
yeah,
probably in Europe too. You have to realize I'm being told things by people who are liars, who
right.
want to destroy me, who want to destroy my family, who want to destroy my culture. Start questioning things and
All
don't
of
be
the
shocked.
heroes and villains should probably be swapped.
Well, maybe not en masse, but maybe, but yeah, in a lot. As a
Yeah,
matter of fact, and I'm lucky because I grew up in a household where my mother would always watch the news at night. She would watch Walter Cronkite on CBS
yeah.
News. And she'd make us sit there with her, and she's like, "This is how they're lying. This is how they're twisting that. Look at," and she told us, she said, if they're painting him as a good guy, he's probably a bad
Yep,
guy, and vice
yep,
versa, right? So that's the
yep.
way I was raised. So I was very lucky. I mean, thank God for my parents. I know no parents are perfect, but wow, I couldn't I couldn't have asked for better parents because they're teaching you how to think critically, and
Hmm.
that's not a skill that is taught. And that's by design too. The General Education Board was founded in the early 1900s by none other than John D. Rockefeller for the purpose of standardizing education across the board. That's why everywhere you go across the United States, from Maine to San Diego, from Washington State to Miami, you're going to find the same textbooks in all the schools. They're all teaching the same thing. And now they're teaching kids, well, you can explore your gender, and carbon dioxide is evil and it's going to make us all die. You know, and where you and I were probably taught in school, carbon dioxide is the gas of life,
Right.
right? It's what makes the plants grow, and that's what our food eats. And so we
We
need
still
carbon.
got the propaganda. I remember, like in fifth grade, being told that by the year 2000, acid rain would be everywhere. I wouldn't be able
Yep.
to go outside and all that kind of stuff.
Yep, I remember the pictures too. They had these raindrops and they had these mean faces.
Yep. Yep.
Raindrops. I'm like, wow,
I
even
don't
the
think I've seen
artwork.
acid rain my whole life, so I don't know what the danger was all about.
Right, the ozone hole. Remember that was a big
Right.
thing
Oh
too.
yeah.
And back in the
Got to throw away
70s.
our Aquanets, right?
Right, exactly. So we have to explain that. That's hairspray for you young people. So, but no, I mean, all of those lies, and that none of them have come true. And you can, and we prove it. We write about that all the time in the New American Magazine. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter. They keep lying, and we keep believing it because we're not taught to think critically. So, but the Carbonari, so what the Carbonari did in Italy, they stole a bunch of church properties, I mean, just outright through taxation. So they inserted themselves in all of the local
Government.
government,
Yep.
and they started taxing out the wazoo. So a lot of church properties were stolen that way because the churches couldn't stay in business, so to speak. That's a bad way of saying something about a church, but
You
yeah,
can't own property if you're going to be like an individual would lose their property doing it. Anybody would.
right. And they also conscripted seminarians. They forced seminarians to go into the army.
Is this one of the reasons that the founding fathers made churches tax exempt? So that or is that just a separate issue?
Well, that's a long story too, because the 501c3 was created by Lyndon Johnson.
No, but before that, even I thought the entire history of our country that
Yes.
churches didn't pay property taxes.
Right. You're exactly right. And they shouldn't.
Right.
However, because churches have always been a huge political bulwark,
Yep.
right? So in order to unplug them, that power from them, but still keep them, tax exempt, Lyndon Johnson came in with the
Right.
501c3 designation, which means you can be tax exempt, but you can't take a political stand anymore. And everybody said, oh, okay. No, that's something worth fighting for. That's not an evil we should tolerate. But people did it. So it's just
American War for Independence wouldn't have happened if that was the case in the 1770s.
Right. Right. Exactly. I mean, there was a point where people said, okay, enough is enough. We're going to have to go, take this one.
The pastors that were leading the way.
Right. Right. Exactly. So, but yeah, the churches have always been a huge, you can't overcome that when the churches get together and they say, I'll give you an example. Very recently in history, there was from the 1930s until the 1960s, there was something called the Hayes Code. It was also called the Legion of Decency. It was Catholics and Protestants. It was Christians who got together and said, we don't like what we're seeing coming out of Hollywood in the 1930s. And this could lead our children down the wrong path.
Yep.
So we are going to implement a code. And if you go against that code in making your movie, Mr. Producer and Mr. Director, then you are going to die at the box office, because we out in the churches are going to tell our flocks, you go to that movie. And like, for instance, in the Catholic Church, the priest would say, you go to that movie, you've committed a mortal sin.
Yeah.
You can't come to communion,
Yeah.
And it was, and for that 35-year period, the churches held sway over Hollywood. That's why during that time period, you didn't see a lot of, they were not able to put all the filth and perversion that they do now. And once they got rid of the Hayes Code and the Legion of Decency shut down, look what happens now.
Right. When we have this ridiculous ratings code where a family thinks, well, it's PG, it's safe for my kids, when it's
right.
propaganda bare minimum.
Right. Exactly. And I heard a really good story. This didn't really happen. This is just a little parable. But a couple of brothers wanted to go out with their friends to see a movie, and it was known that there was some bad stuff in this movie. But they asked their father, and he said, no, you can't do that. You can't go see that movie with your friends. And they were sullen, and they were mad, and they were angry. And but they didn't go. They didn't go see it. They said that movie only has like 2%. There's only one scene in that movie that's objectionable. That's only like 2% of the movie.
Yep. They
were arguing with him, but he said no. He put his foot down. No. Well, after a while, they smelled brownies cooking in the kitchen. Their father had cooked them for some brownies, and they thought, and he said, boys, come in here. I cooked you some brownies. And they thought he was trying to, apologize to them for being kind of too mean. And he said, look, before you eat these brownies, I know they smell really good and you want to dig into them, but before you eat them, I want you to know that I mixed them with the best possible ingredients. But right before I put it in the oven, I also mixed into the batter. I went out in the yard and got some poo-poo from our dog. And it only makes up 2% of the batter. It's only 2%. But there is that ingredient in there. So anyway, here you go. Have at it with the brownies. And the boys didn't eat the brownies.
I can't imagine.
Right. Exactly. Because it matters.
Right.
2% matters. There was a study too, this was real. There was a study about they were trying to, push all this Darwinism and evolution, and there was a study done on the differences between the DNA of, uh, chimps, monkeys, or I don't know if it was orangutans or whatever, and humans. And the scientists found there was only a 2% difference in, in the DNA between those 2.
Mm.
My sister and I were talking about this. She said, "What a difference 2% makes."
Yeah, no kidding.
Makes a
That
difference,
is well,
right?
I think my question kinda diverted you. You were going back to the Carbonari and the taxing of the
Yeah,
church.
I'm sorry. I'm
Oh,
sorry, I'm
my
going
fault. I went off on a tangent, so go ahead.
I was like, okay, so the Carbonari just took over and basically, um, emasculated the churches and, made the church subservient to the government. And
Right.
remember what I was talking about before in those dark ages when
Yeah.
the governments were subservient to the church, and there was, I mean, everything thrived. Art, music, architecture, all of those old, universities that still exist today, they aren't necessarily great now, but the Sorbonne, I mean, all of those universities that are
Yeah.
still in existence today, they're 800 and 900 years old. They all were founded during the time of the Dark Ages. That
Mhm.
kind of thing can't happen. When you have enough leisure time to be able to invest in study and not just live at a subsistence level,
Right.
that means your culture and your society is thriving. So
Right.
before you're ever really too harsh on the old Catholic Church, think about that. And all of these people who come in with their, "Oh, the dark ages." Well, the dark ages were pretty bright from what I can see. Well, now all of a sudden what they're doing is they're turning it on its head, which is absolutely when we look into discerning spirits, right? Is this a demonic influence or is this a beneficent influence? It's always the demons will invert things. So now it's inverted. So
Right.
you have the government telling the church what to do, right? And
Right.
now you don't have that stone wall between the oppressor and the people. Hello. It's a free for all, and that's what happened. So, this is interesting too. The Carbonari played an active role in the American Civil War. Abraham Lincoln offered control, generalship of the Union armies to Giuseppe Garibaldi. Now, this is not Giuseppe Mazzini. He was the leader of the Carbonari. Giuseppe Garibaldi was a very militant Carbonariist in Italy. His target was he wanted to kill the Pope. He actually put the Vatican under siege. When Pius IX died and Pope Leo XIII was elected, Leo XIII was elected Pope and he was under siege by Giuseppe Garibaldi. Abraham Lincoln had offered control of the Union forces to Garibaldi. He turned him down because he said, "My target is the Pope." John Wilkes Booth, who ultimately assassinated Lincoln, was a Carbonari. And so
So that's
there
kind
was,
of like that whole situation reminds me of like the situation in the Star Wars prequels where you have these two sides, right, that appear to be fighting each other, but they're both ruled by the same people. And
right,
so you've got Lincoln, who is clearly the villain, and then you have, like you said, the guy that kills Lincoln, the villain, is a villain himself.
right,
And so we always want to have good guys and bad guys fighting each other so we can pick a side.
right.
But really, what we see is it's both sides are controlled by the same puppet masters.
Well, and two, leave the war aside. Look
Right.
at the administration of Abraham Lincoln and
Right.
all of the things he did, 1861 and 1862. He opened the floodgates of what is now our fourth branch of government. Up
Mhm.
until that time, there had just been a very few cabinet departments and federal agencies like the Land Grant Office, founded in 1812 to manage westward expansion, to encourage people here, take this land and distribute the Louisiana Purchase, so to speak. Um, but then in 1849, which was actually before Lincoln's administration, right before that, they founded the Department of the Interior. They did away with the Land Grant Office. The Department of Interior was now empowered not just to manage federal lands, but to manage the resources on them, to manage minerals, water use, timber, land use. You're starting to see federal encroachment. Now they're not telling you, hey, here, take this land. They're saying that you can't use it. You only have to use it this way, this way, this way, this way. And then Abraham Lincoln comes in, and you've got the Homestead Act, which was exploited by the wealthy interests. It was supposed to do what the Land Grant Office had been doing just fine on its own. But no, this was so wealthy interests could gobble up that land for their own selfish purposes. He did the Second Confiscation Act, which followed on the heels of the First Confiscation Act, to take land away from Confederates, using that as an excuse, which, by the way, the whole American Civil War was orchestrated, and the main orchestrator was E.B. Staunton. Well, I think I'm saying his name correctly, but you look into his history if you're interested to know that. Abraham Lincoln was really just a puppet. He was doing what he was told, and when he stopped doing what he was told and wanted to, no, we don't need to do that Reconstruction stuff, bang, they took him out. And then the next president who came in was all about Reconstruction, because he didn't want a bullet to the brain either. So and you had also Abraham Lincoln in 1862, the Land Grant College Act, which was the first federal foray into higher education and would soon provide the country with an army of economists to justify further federal encroachment into all of these areas. He also founded in 1862 the Department of Agriculture. The United States Department of Agriculture is that old, and Congress, what the bill Congress passed said that it was instituted to manage agriculture, aquaculture, human nutrition, and something else I can't remember. But I'm not paraphrasing; those are actual quotes.
Yeah,
human nutrition in the broadest definition of those terms. It says that.
crazy.
And that's 1862. So, we have to understand things didn't just get bad in 2020. Things didn't just get bad, and people say, oh, FDR was the worst president we've ever had. FDR would not have been able to do anything without Abraham, without the Lincoln administration,
Absolutely. Yep.
So
a couple of things that you brought up, and it's so easy to go off on all these little
I know we're going off on all these tangents. I'm so sorry.
No. It's because it's just these are kind of like important little sub things to help us to understand the bigger picture.
Right.
But people will think that, oh, you're against the Enlightenment, and then, oh, you're against separation of church and state. Well, both of those things people don't realize. Like, you have Abigail Adams, when she wrote a letter to a friend of hers recommending the book Proofs of a Conspiracy by Robeson, was talking about how that whole movement was, and she wasn't a Catholic, was about destroying Christianity. And then you get to the so-called separation between church and state. The states that signed that, adopted the First Amendment, their states all had official religions. So this idea of having religion completely separate from their, government was just ridiculous.
Well, and they know that. They know they have to do that, because otherwise the church would be there to protect the people, and they want that out of the way. So,
and people think that, and so you have the conspiracy inventing, just kind of like what they do with like the civil rights movement, where they take these examples of legitimate grievances and blow it up of why we need to get more government control, either get religion out or make sure that the government is telling you who to associate with. Mm-hmm. And so they use legitimate, again, grievances. I'm not, like you said earlier, we're not going to say that there weren't things that shouldn't have been done, but they use that legitimate problem to destroy the entire infrastructure, which was protecting the people from this satanic conspiracy that wants to enslave them.
Right, exactly. And what's interesting I'm glad you invoked the Proofs of the Conspiracy by John Robeson, who was a professor in England at the time. And that book was published in 1798. Mm-hmm. Another gentleman in France was doing exactly the same study and exactly the same work. Robeson and he did not know each other. Yep. This was Abbe Baruel in France. His book is called The History of Jacobinism.
Yep.
And so the memoirs of the history of Jacobinism.
Illustrated the history of Jacobinism.
Right, and exactly, and they always had those long names of books back then. In fact, Proofs of a Conspiracy, Proofs of a Conspiracy and all the Masonic lodges of Europe and I mean,
Yeah,
the
it's really, yeah, all
title
of them
goes
are,
on and on,
yeah.
but to read those 2 books and realize those men were doing separate research from what they didn't even know. The
Mhm.
books were published almost simultaneously, 1789, 1798, 1799.
And the book on Jacobinism has just amazing footnotes. I wish that like somebody needs to go and publish all of the books that are in the footnotes.
Yes, that absolutely do. I'm not saying it's light reading, and the
It's a fat
special.
book.
Yes, very fat books. You can't think, "Oh, I'm gonna sit down and read this," and it just, take it little bits at a time,
Right.
and then you'll realize, "Oh, okay." So, when somebody calls themselves if I've got a salesman, and he's trying to sell me, I don't know, a vacuum cleaner, and he says, "This is the best vacuum cleaner in the world. You should buy this vacuum cleaner."
Mhm.
Am I gonna believe him? It might be, right? So when people call themselves, "We're the Enlightenment, we're enlightened, we know," you're believing a salesman's pitch at just taking his word for it.
Like progressive. We're so progressive. That means it's like this double speak of that means anybody that disagrees with me is regressive. You're a caveman,
Right.
and I'm the smart one because I'm progressive. It's propaganda.
Oh, absolutely, it's propaganda, but we believe it, and we parrot it. We
Mhm.
parrot all of this, and so, but well, I mean, the reason we're repeating history is because we don't know our history.
Right.
And we need to go back, and you have to go all the way back to the beginning and say, okay, every single time this is just history repeating itself. Now, though, we have it, like, for instance, okay, back in 1542, King Henry VIII signed himself declared himself sovereign over Ireland with a stroke of a pen. Okay. And he started implementing all sorts of uh, they were land grabs,
Mhm.
always with some excuse. There was always some excuse to grab land and bestow that land on absentee English landlords, right? So then that paved the way for Oliver Cromwell's conquest of Ireland in the 1600s, 1652, and then the Popery Acts came in early 1700s. Anybody who was Catholic had their land um, taken away. I'm giving the Cliff Notes version, of course, because back then it was like, well, they used the religion, as an
Yeah.
excuse, once again, to grab land. And then when the potato blight hit, the government in 1845, 1846, those years, the potato blight,
Yeah.
Ireland could have survived that, but England enforced continued to enforce Irish grain exports to England, to all of those absentee English landlords. It prevented Ireland from importing anything, and it also, another land grab tactic, if you received aid from the government during that potato famine, then you had to give up your land. So that's why we saw that massive influx of the Irish into the United States in that time period. And of course, they were put to work as slaves in the factories. We know that story.
Mhm.
And it's now we're seeing our country. Hello, how many absentee landlords do we have in the form of Chinese owners, in the form Bill Gates and all of this? History is repeating itself.
Yeah.
'Cause we don't know. Now,
BlackRock, and people, bring up BlackRock in that situation, but who's BlackRock's boss? What are they the corporate member of? The Council on Foreign Relations.
relations, right?
So I
Exactly.
mean,
Exactly. And we have all of this happening, but it's been happening for a long, long time. I spoke with a gentleman recently who used to work for the USDA in the 1970s, and he said that at the time he was in Arkansas. He worked for, and he said there were Chinese landowners. He was trying to sound the alarm on it back then because the
yeah.
Chinese were coming in and buying up Arkansas farmland. So this has been going on a long time, and we do not know. We are suffering from our lack of knowledge of history. That's all you know. All these people who seem to be prophets and be able to tell what's coming, tell you,
Right.
and they end up being right. Like Robert Welch, the
Right.
founder of the John
Exactly.
Birch
That's what I was
Society.
just thinking that same thing.
Right. It was just because he was a student of history. That's why
Right.
he actually he told us. He said they're after our cars. They're going to
Right.
take away your cars. And now you have all of these comprehensive plans that are straight from Agenda 2030 that are implemented at the local levels. You know, the NGOs come in and they have everything all printed out, glossies, all the I's dotted, T's crossed, and they're like, "Oh, this is for sustainable development for your community." And you know, these county commissioners or city planners, they're none the wiser. They don't know it comes straight from Agenda 2030. And they're like, well, yeah, this looks great. And they sign on the dotted line. And you have all those little telling catchphrases like
Yep.
sustainable development. And some of them say, the unsustainability of transportation based on single occupancy vehicles. That's
Another
their
word for car.
Right, that's their verbiage that means we're taking away your cars, and that's and they're setting up now. There's those robo taxis. They're setting up
Yep.
the geofencing for robo taxis. That geofencing is what's going to be used to keep us in when they implement central bank digital currency, which is programmable. You won't be able to use your money outside of that geofenced area. They're doing it right in front of us using the robo taxis as an excuse.
Well, like that sounds crazy what Robert Welch said about cars, but they also said he was crazy for saying Castro was a communist. Now looking at history being hindsight's 2020,
Right.
but it wasn't because he was some kind of psychic. He just read his words,
Right.
and that's all we have to do is read their documents. They're telling us what they want to do.
Yep. Absolutely. And so, we have to be students of history, and it really doesn't take that. It's not that hard. You're not going to have to go read encyclopedias and spend, years and years and years. You don't have to go to get a 4-year history degree. Certainly don't don't get a history degree from a modern university. But, shows like yours, this is wonderful. My magazine, The New American, you can learn so much about history. We publish things
I'm
like
a
this.
subscriber. Yep.
Right, like what you and I are talking about all the time, and it doesn't take that much. Unplug. Turn off the screens. You are being brainwashed. Now that I said that, I'm gonna refer you to a documentary that talks about this, so you're gonna have to use this. But, there's a great documentary that just recently came out called Planet Mind Control by Jason Christoff. It is excellent, and you will quickly find out how controlled we are and why we're so controlled. They're influencing elections, they're influencing all of this. If we would unplug from our phones, none of our children would be gender confused. None of our children would be spouting off all of this climate change nonsense. Unplug, turn that TV, that screen that's on in your home is an open line of sewage coming into your home.
Yep.
So take back control of your family. That's what, if everybody would do that, think if everybody had shown up without not wearing masks.
Right.
What if everybody en masse had said, that's ridiculous?
Yep.
What would have happened?
That's what I've done, right? I've got it. This is my dumb phone.
Yeah.
It's a trend, and it's been great for our family to get rid of the smartphones and go back. It's a pain in the to text. It's a pain to text, but it's so worth that one little inconvenience is so worth the avoiding the other problems.
Oh, that's why you never use capital and you never use punctuation in your text.
Yep. It all makes sense now. But I won't send you a link during in text. And
that's great. Well, I know that we've gone way off of topic. We were supposed to talk about.
I know. Maybe we take 10 more minutes and we come back another time. I'd love to have you talk about this again, but let's try to circle back again to the conspiracies takedown of the Catholic Church and how that really has led to what we're seeing today.
Absolutely. Well, I don't even know where to start, to tell you the truth. I can tell you that the church that if you walk into any Catholic church down the street from you today, you're going to see a vastly different church than you would have seen even 50 years ago, but certainly 100 years ago.
Right.
But if you walked into a Catholic church 100 years ago, and then you walked into that same church 200 years ago, 100 years before that, you was seeing the same thing. And 300 years and 400 years and 500 years, going back, it would have been the same, always the same, until they changed everything in the 1960s. And they said this, the Pope and all of his, band of cardinals and all this said, we want to open the church to the modern world. Oh, can you think of an uglier world than the modern world? No, as far as I'm speaking spiritually. I'm
Right.
speaking of,
Yeah, give me the Sistine Chapel, not these monstrosities that look like 70s Soviet style apartment complexes.
yeah, I know. Some of them look like, UFOs or
Yeah.
something. They're insane. So yeah, you're gonna see, and all of the art now that they have, that beautiful art from the old, uh not even not so old, just, just like I said, 100 years ago and before that. That was true spirituality that inspired those. Now we have modern art, in Catholic
Th- th-
churches. It
This
doesn't
had
inspire.
this had to have been a gradual process because you don't have a guy that is going through and is a believer in original Catholicism,
Right.
and then all of a sudden wakes up one day as Pope and says Vatican II, that's the way to go. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me, right?
Exactly. Well, when Giuseppe Sarto was elected Pope in 1903, he took the name Pius the 10th. He cried when he was elected Pope. He didn't want the responsibility. I think he was a very sane man to have reacted that way. But he was the second who was elected. There was another Pope elected in that conclave. And
Mm,
there was a little known rule that the Holy Roman Emperor could override a papal election in the event of an emergency. And the
mm.
Holy Roman Emperor showed up at that conclave and said, "I cry foul, the man you have arrested, I mean, the man you have elected is a Mason."
Mm.
And sure enough, they looked into it and
So
he
the
was.
Holy Roman Empire or emperor was a decent guy.
The Holy Roman Emperor was a decent guy. Yeah, he was
Wow.
like he was saving his church. He was saving
Wow.
his church and he said to Mason, okay, again, it was Carbonari. Okay,
Right.
so
Right.
use whatever name you want. So he was one of those.
Carbonari helps you to understand what kind
Right,
of Mason he was.
right. You needed to understand that Carbonari history in order to understand what was going on here. So they had
Right.
infiltrated. Infiltrated the College of Cardinals, and he was elected. And he came in and he exercised his veto power. It was the only time in history that the Holy Roman Emperor exercised his veto power and
Wow.
saved the church from having a Carbonari as the Pope. Now, so Giuseppe Sarto was
I've got a
elected.
question that's going to take us on a tangent. I know it. How does that happen? How do you infiltrate the Cardinals to be able to do
You
that?
you tell them that you're you pretend. You pretend to
No,
be,
right. Exactly.
you
Yeah.
know? I
But it had to
mean,
have been like a long time. It's not like something like,
right. It happened over a long time. Well, think about
yeah,
it. I mean, let me see. 1776 was when Adam Weishaupt
right.
founded
May
the
1st,
Illuminati,
May
right?
Day.
He died. Right. He died, I forget what year, but then Giuseppe Mazzini takes over when he dies, and
Mhm.
so that's the 1800s,
Yeah.
okay? And so now we're all the way to 1903, so we've
Right.
been through several generations. So they had the Carbonari under Giuseppe Mazzini was infiltrating everything,
And
government,
so they were joining the churches. They want to destroy the Catholic Church, and so
right,
they got their men to enter into seminaries and to work
right.
their way up.
Exactly. So now they have their first Carbonari as elected pope, 1903. Holy Roman Emperor comes in and gets rid of that, takes care of that. And then Pius X, once he becomes pope, one of the first things he did was he implemented an oath against modernism. And you can
Mm.
look this up online. It's not long. It's rather short, but every single Catholic seminarian in the world was forced to take this oath against modernism, and it's very instructive to read that oath, no matter what religion you are. Look
Sure.
it up online, The Oath Against Modernism by Pope Pius X, and every seminarian was bound to take that oath. And I'm sorry I can't tell you exactly when the oath was done away with, but it was done away with, and then we had the Novus Ordo.
So it
They
was
even call
before
it the
Vatican II.
Right, on the back of the $1 bill, it says Novus Ordo Seclorum, New
Yeah.
World Order, and they called their new mass that they implemented in the 1960s, the Novus Ordo Missae. So we have Novus Ordo Seclorum, Novus Ordo Missae. They're just right out in front of us, admitting who they are, and we don't know because we don't know our history.
Right.
We don't
Or
know
our
our
Latin.
Or our Latin, right? Exactly. And by the way, you should know too that the reason that emblem of the Illuminati, and that is the emblem of the Illuminati, and I don't know if we have time to talk about it, but the reason it's on the back of our $1 bills is because of FDR. His Treasury Secretary, what was his name? Wallace? Was his name Wallace? Anyway, he found it. He did not realize that the seal, the Great Seal of the United States of America, had two sides, which was unprecedented in history. That Great Seal of the United States of America was requisitioned by Congress in the 1700s after our Revolutionary War. So they have the eagle on the front, but on the back, on the obverse of the seal, nobody else has two sides of a seal. It doesn't make sense. Your seal is what you put in the wax, you know.
Right.
So on the back of the seal was the emblem of the Illuminati. And he found it and he got really excited about it. And he took it to FDR and they were both really excited. He wanted to have a coin minted that was both sides of the Great Seal. And Roosevelt said, no, I want to have it on the back of the $1 bill. They were really excited about it. And we have this from his own letters that he wrote because they recognized it as, they identified it as a symbol of Masonry, of the Illuminati. And Roosevelt.
So why did the founders put that on the seal?
We had that infiltration in our government from the earliest days.
And the ones that weren't infiltrated, ignorant, just put up with it?
Maybe, I don't know. That's a good question, and that would be something worth looking into. But there were 3 people who were responsible for coming up with that Great Seal. It's interesting that they put the symbol of the Illuminati on the obverse side, which would be the unseen side.
Right.
We're working in secret, right? And for years, for more than 100 years, it was completely forgotten that the Great Seal of the United States had a backside, and that was the symbol of the Illuminati.
Wow.
So yeah, really interesting story. But again, you have to know history to be able to see these things. And I'm very, again, thank you, God, for my parents. I thank you I know now that I'm older I wish I had known that. Youth is wasted on the young, right? I didn't value it then, but now I'm so grateful. So grateful.
So what's the main difference between, for those of our listeners like myself are ignorant of the difference between the old order and the new order of Mass?
Oh goodness, that would take a whole.
Some key, like top 3, 5.
Well, you know what? I can answer that question pretty succinctly.
Okay.
Back when they crafted the new Mass, when they put it together, and by the way, there were 6 Protestant ministers who helped to write the new order.
Why would you have people from different churches telling you what? That's just crazy.
They were on the commission to write this new Mass, and they came out with a new definition of Mass. The old definition of Mass was the Mass is the unbloody sacrifice of Calvary. That's it. The Mass is the unbloody sacrifice of Calvary. It's the same sacrifice that Christ made, because he said, do this in remembrance of me. This is my body. This is my blood. You remember at the Last Supper? This is my body. This is my blood. And the very next day, he actually offered his real body and his real blood. So it's not just a reenactment. It is actually the unbloody sacrifice of Calvary replayed in every Catholic church, every Latin Mass. Okay. Then the definition of the new Mass, the Novus Ordo Missae, was the Mass is a sacred gathering of the Lord's people with the priest presiding to celebrate the memorial of the Lord. It's not the same thing. And the old Mass, the priest celebrates the Mass at the altar. You offer a sacrifice at an altar. The priest's back is to the people. The priest is facing the tabernacle. He's facing our Lord. He's offering the sacrifice to God on behalf of the people who are behind him watching all of this. Yeah. Right. In the new Mass, the priest is at a table. Remember, it's a sacred gathering of the people with the priest presiding to celebrate the memorial of the Lord. There's no sacrifice. You eat a meal at a table. You offer a sacrifice at an altar. Big, big, big. Interestingly, a lot of the changes that they made were the changes that Cromwell made when Henry VIII declared himself sovereign of the Church of England, and
Yeah.
Cromwell rewrote the Mass, and he turned the priest around to face the people and had a table. And that's one of the many parallels between the Novus Ordo Missae and Cranmer. Did I say Cromwell? I meant Cranmer.
Cromwell. Oh, okay. That's
Cranmer.
important distinction.
Yeah, all these C names. I'm sorry. I mean, I misspoke there. It's Cranmer, Archbishop Cranmer in
Gotcha.
England back then in the 1500s.
Cromwell's got his own problems.
So yeah, but I mean, oh, holy cow, that's all of the differences between the two. We can only just start, like, one of them is during the Mass we recite the Credo. I believe in God the Father Almighty, the Nicene Creed.
Mhm.
And it goes on. In the new order of Mass, they changed that to we believe, meaning now I'm part of a community, and whatever the community believes is what I'm going to believe.
Wow.
Right? You see how that psychologically plays
Yeah.
on, say, a child.
It seems it's a distinction without a difference, but it's a very important difference.
Very important difference.
Why change it if it's not a difference?
Right, because if everybody else goes astray,
Right.
if I'm the only one who still believes in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, the faith will go on
Right.
this earth, even if I'm the only one.
Yep.
And you have to be ready for that. You have to be ready to stand against the world,
Yeah.
So we need that faith, and we need that faith in our women, because the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. We let them convince all of our women to take their hands off the cradle. Who's rocking the cradle? We know who's rocking the cradle. The people who are ruling the world right now in the form of the UN and the World Economic Forum and all of these other, heads on the Hydra, heads on that. Always remember, heads on the Hydra. There's one Hydra.
There's one Hydra.
Right?
I say that so much. People have to understand it's one conspiracy. We're not facing a bunch of conspiracies. This is one satanic conspiracy that is seeking to enslave us all. And the government schools are the church of the government. This is their Sunday school. This is their primary. You are sending your kids to be indoctrinated in this satanic system ignorantly, and it needs to stop. We need to get rid of that and return our children home and have them only indoctrinated by the faith of their fathers.
Yep. They keep us busy playing the spiritual whack-a-mole or political whack-a-mole.
Yep.
And we're constantly putting out fires when we're not dealing
with the arsonist.
Right. Yes. We had to go after the arsonist. So
well, this has been a blast. I hope we can do it again real soon. So I appreciate you being on again. Thank you, Rebecca, from the New American Magazine, senior editor, the senior editor, or one
of many. One of several.
Thank you so much. Go check out thenewamerican.com, and I just really appreciate you being on, and hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you, Ben.